Okay, well, Gina, Holland, and Debbie Beauchamp, welcome to Shrink Wrap Radio.
Thank you. Very happy to be here.
Yeah, this is kind of new. I don't do too many interviews where I've got two people on camera at the same time, sitting side by side in the way that you are, but it's delightful. And what a miracle it is that here I am in Northern California and you two are in London and we're able to communicate in this way. It's just magical.
It is.
And this has come about because one of my listeners, who you may know, listener James Marshall,
Yes.
he's a former BBC personality, I gather, director and so on.
Yeah.
And he urged me to contact you for an interview. I guess he's been in some of your workshops, and he urged me to contact you for an interview, saying that your personal growth workshops are some of the most powerful, transformative experiences that he's had, and I guess he's experienced quite a bit.
Yes.
We do often get that feedback, so yeah.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, your workshops are called Celebration of Being. So, and because it's a corporation, it will read sometimes, some of the places I was looking, it said, Celebration of Being Limited. I thought, of being limited? Who wants to celebrate being limited?
I know, unfortunately, that's the terminology in England for a limited company, to limited by, I can't think what.
Yeah. It's just a strange juxtaposition. I'm glad I got that worked out finally in my head. So tell us about Celebration of Being. You know, what is it and how did it get started?
So Celebration of Being was originally founded by a lady called Rajo Markman and Britta Johnson, and they're actually based in California. And so they...
Surprising. There's a way that's very surprising.
I know. So well, Raja is actually English and Britta is German, but they were both on their own, I guess, personal transformational work led them to California. And they, the work originally grew from women's work. So Rajo set up what's called the Celebration of Women workshop at a time when she was really desperate and sort of was feeling like there was something missing for the feminine. And so she put together the Celebration of Women workshop and then met Britta, and they created Celebration of Being, which was about 25 years ago now. And after a few years of doing the women's work, they sort of realized we're missing 50% of the population here. And so what they then did was create mixed workshops. So that was the Noble Man and the Power of Love. And those workshops really came together to create healing between men and women. And so it's now been, the business is still running in the US, but just with Britta now and her partner Lee. And that's now called Core. But the foundations of it is still the Celebration of Being work. And in the UK, myself and Gina have been running it now for probably 15 years. We've both been involved.
Wow, 15 years. And how did you two meet?
We met on one of the groups, actually.
Okay, so you met on groups that you weren't running yet, or one of you was running. How did?
No,
who was running that you were in?
We weren't running it. Rajo was facilitating, and we met on the second level. We both met on Goddess 2.
So we were participants at that workshop. And what happened at the time was they were talking about the mixed group work that they did. And at the time, I just sort of said, I don't want to go to America to do that. Why are you not doing it here in the UK? And they said, well, because we don't have anybody to hold space for that. So I put my hand up and said, well, I'm going to make that happen here. So that was how I became involved. And Gina at the time also stepped up more to support on the women's side, wasn't it? And so we became a team at that time. There were 4 of us involved in really just coming together, because at that time there wasn't really anybody. There was one person, I think, holding the work in the UK as sort of administrating and promoting. So we came together to just grow the work really so that we could do the mixed work together. I mean, certainly I speak for myself, but I never imagined I would be facilitating workshops sort of 10 years down the line. But there was a call inside of me that just knew, I guess I needed that for my own personal growth work. I knew that I needed to heal.
Now you're now both certified counselors there in the UK, right? And
Yeah.
were you already certified counselors, or did that come later?
I was.
And I wasn't. I was working in the corporate world. I was working in a major financial institution, and really as a result, not just of celebration of being, but I guess my own personal journey led me to really start to ask questions about what I was doing in my life, and I realized that I was not enjoying the work that I was doing. And so then I retrained as a counsellor and went part-time, and then eventually qualified about 8 years ago now.
So your work involves working with what I think you refer to as the masculine and feminine principles.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're working with sort of the two actual genders of men and women, but also you have this notion of the feminine principle and the masculine principle. So let's pull those apart a little bit and have you tell us, what do you think of when you're talking about the feminine principle or the masculine principle?
Well, the way we see it is that we're made up of both energies, and a woman that's presenting a femaleness has also got masculine characteristics. Now, what we saw, and what I certainly did for myself, I lived mostly from those characteristics. And this is not generalizing, but for me, it was being driven, it was having structure, leaving no space, it was being focused, it was kind of more of a driven energy than the natural feminine that I've come to see, that's flow and surrender, receptivity, trust, allowing. So I wasn't in touch with any of that. I was just getting the job done. I was just on a treadmill, so to speak. I was a publican many years ago and raising 4 young children that I had really young.
What is a publican? That's not a word we have over here.
It means I was a landlady of public houses.
Pubs,
yes.
Do you have like bars?
Like what?
Like bars.
Where people drink alcohol and
Yeah.
So that sort of, it was a bar.
Yeah. Does that?
Oh, okay. We call it a bartender, I guess.
Yes, but it was the manager. It was the licensee of the bar.
Okay.
Anyway, that was my former job, and I was very driven and very structured, and not at all connected with my feminine.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how about for you, Debbie? You were in the financial industry. I can kind of imagine that might have a lot of the masculine in it.
Definitely, very similar to Gina, driven by goals and by performance. And I was also a mother to 3 children, so my life had no space at all. And when I look back, it's like I really felt dead inside, if I'm honest. It was like I was just going through the motions and just fulfilling what I was told was the right thing to do. So get a job, make sure I had financial security, and then just drive myself like tirelessly to perform at work and then at home taking care of my children. And when I look back, it was like I was working in a sort of 90% male dominated industry, and the principles were very all about success. Came from how much money you earned, whether I delivered on my goals or not. And there wasn't so much about the relationships I was creating with clients. Although, to be honest, that was why I was successful, was because of creating relationships with people. And also what I realize now is I had an intuition about people. So I would know when to push a deal or when not to push a deal. But I wasn't really consciously connected to that. I think unconsciously there was certainly some of my feminine was working to allow me to perform in the way that I did. But I was unhappy, is the bottom line. I wasn't very happy in the job that I was doing.
Okay. Now, this masculine and feminine principle, of course, sounds very reminiscent of Jung's idea of anima and animus. And are those identical for you, or do you see some distinction between the Jungian notion and the way that you're using these terms?
For me, it's a way of expressing something that you can't really name. To put it in really simple terms, it's about connecting the head and the heart. So I'm sure that if we go back, that's the same principle, but dressed up differently. So there's
Okay.
the connection, and for both, it's to not live from just one place, to be rooted and rested in the heart, and still use the mind as a tool and to focus and to get jobs done, but not to be driven and coming from that place. So in terms
Okay.
of the comparison with the Jungian, and I'm a fan, I like the work of Carl Jung, but I don't know language-wise how accurate that is.
Yeah. What do you say to people who would contend that these are gender stereotypes about femininity and masculinity?
I think there's some truth in that. There's, which is why, you know, we use for us, there's men and there's women, but we all see each individual as very unique, and that's something that we really focus on at the workshops. It's like we have this range of different energies, some considered and labelled more masculine, others labelled more feminine, and along that range, we all have access at different levels to those different energies, and it's about really finding what is your natural essence, because I think what can happen is we get told we need to be a certain way, and then what happens is, so we perform in that way, but actually it goes against what our true nature is. And so really for us, what we're looking to do is to get away from the what would you call it?
Or even the labels and the stereotypes, because for us it's very much about removing the labels and coming back to naturalness.
Okay.
So what's your natural energy? What is your natural resting state?
Well, let's bring it down from the theoretical to the practical and experiential. I'd like to be kind of a fly on the wall if I were at one of these workshops. I guess you have three different kinds of workshops. You've got sort of the men only, the women only, and the mixed gender workshops, right?
Yeah.
So let's start with where I think you guys started, which was the women only workshop. If I were a fly on the wall, what would I see? What goes on there? How many days is it, or hours is it, and what are the processes that?
It's a 3.5-day experiential workshop for women.
Okay, 3.5 days.
Yeah, it's very much coming back to circle work, women sitting in circles and supporting and being with each other. We use a lot of movement, meditation, and processes to kind of crack the heart open and bring the walls down. And it culminates into really clearing the energy field so that people can step into who they truly are. So the first day and a half is really about letting go of anything that's no longer serving us, misunderstandings, past issues, resentments. And there's lots of techniques, processes, movement-based things that we do to release this in the body.
Okay.
And then there's a whole day of ritual, rite of passage, sacred space, where people step into their true selves. And yeah, it's a beautiful thing to witness. If you was a fly on the wall, you'd be very happy.
I'd be a happy fly on the wall.
You'd be a happy fly on the wall.
And
the final day is for integration and preparing to go back into the world. So,
okay, I'm a veteran of a long career in participating and leading various kinds of human potential workshops. So a lot of what you're saying feels pretty familiar to me in some ways. About how many women would be involved in any given workshop?
We tend to keep the workshops, just because we choose to, quite intimate. So we would tend to be anything between 20 and 30 women. That would be, for us, it's like we'd like it to be intimate and to give people space, the space that they need and the personal attention that they need from us and the team that we have supporting us.
Yeah, well, actually, that's kind of large, but I guess it works for you. And if you've been doing this for 15 years, something must be working, right? You would have quit if it wasn't working and connecting with people.
Yeah, and I think the thing that's working is building community, because we've got little pop-ups all over the UK where people hold spaces and circles where people can stay connected and gatherings. So it's kind of it's an ongoing building of community, which we're both passionate about as well.
Yeah. Do you ever have get-togethers with your larger community of people who've taken the workshop over the years?
Yes,
Any, like, big tribal gatherings or anything?
not as big as we like.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, but there's lots of people doing some beautiful stuff that have been connected through the work.
Okay. And I recall from something I read on your website, I think, that part of the process involves having men observe on the outside. Where does that come in, and who are the men? Are they the men in the women's lives? Are they random men? Who are these men?
So what we have is the entry point for women is the celebration of woman. The entry point for men is what we call the noble man. So the men would come into a workshop which is held and facilitated by women. And the purpose of that workshop is for the men to look at their woundings around the feminine and to mostly, not entirely, but work with the mother wound. So the wound that was created around their mother and the relationship they had with their mother. That's mostly, sometimes people don't necessarily come with the mother wound specifically, and then it's often we're working on their personal relationships, like their wives or previous girlfriends, so that can also be the case. So those men that have then been through the noble man, they then come, so what happens at the noble man is there's a group of women that have all been through celebration of woman, and they come and hold space for the men to work on their issues. So they're not so much witnesses, but they're holding space for the men they witness, they acknowledge, and they participate in the men's healing around the feminine. And again, that's very experiential. It's the same amount of time as the celebration of women, so it's a 3.5-day retreat. I don't know if I'd call it a retreat, but a workshop training. And
it's the face of the conscious men for women to come and heal with their issues with the masculine.
So that's the power of love. That would be the next place that the men then come and serve and hold space for the women on the power of love. So they can be their partners. It's not the mainstay. We get a few partners that come together, but often they'll do the work on their own first, and then they'll come and do it together in their partnerships. So mainly it's men that they probably won't know, or they might know because they've staffed on the men's Noble Man workshop. So often they're unrelated who attends which workshop mostly.
So you talk about holding space. Some of it is silent witnessing, observing, I gather. And then there are also other pieces of the process where they come into the discussion or join in exercises, activities.
And they're actively involved in the exercises for the woman or the man's liberation.
Yeah, this it sounds like it would have had its roots in many ways in the women's liberation movement, and then the men's movement, which was sort of an outgrowth of the women's movement. You see it as part of that women's liberation?
To be honest, no, because our approach is we really honour the men when they come in. I think that what we see is that if you want to get sort of through the patriarchal system that we've all lived in, both men and women have been damaged and wounded by that. And for us, we're not coming at it from a feminist perspective. We're more coming from a perspective of, if we honour and respect both men and women, then we rise up together in equality. So certainly, I guess I might call myself a feminist because I'm a woman, but I'm not part of any feminist organisation or anything like that. And actually, I think our roots are not in that our roots are very much in honouring each person for their own uniqueness, and not, the roots of our work doesn't come from that.
Yeah. What about the role of anger in the workshops? I would imagine that I think probably for both genders there are angers and resentments and so on. Maybe you can talk about that and how that's processed.
It's a key aspect. It's interesting on both sides. I think that for the feminine, certainly with our women's work, often the women have been told that not to get angry. You know, women, good girls, they don't get angry. And women are more likely to go to tears than they are to anger. So a lot with the women, we're very much working with allowing them to really embody and feel and express their anger. So that is very much part of the work that we do. And for the men, I think for them, they feel like they can't actually show their anger to the feminine. The feminine can't hold it. It's like, we won't acknowledge it. We won't really hold it. Yeah, we don't want it. And what we tell them is it's certainly not true for us, and it's not true for the women that are on our workshops either, because unexpressed anger comes out in leaky ways, which is unhealthy for relationships and for people's own health. So for us, it's to bring anger into consciousness. And for us, anger we see as a very positive energy. It's an energy that liberates, motivates, it creates change. And it's the suppression that actually causes illnesses and dysfunction.
Okay. What about, I agree with you about the importance of anger. And sometimes in past work, I've noticed that anger can also be somewhat addictive. And so is that an issue that you need to deal with at all? Is having people express the anger is the first, getting in touch with the anger, I guess, is the first step. And then being able to express it would be the second step. And then at some point, is there a letting go of anger process and maybe forgiveness?
Yes, yes, because what we find is what sits underneath the anger is the more softer, the vulnerable, the hurt, the qualities that people don't feel so safe expressing, and they need a really, really safe place to get to these emotions. Because in my own experience, I could do anger all day long, but if I was asked to show my vulnerability and my hurt and the places that I was wounded, I would need to feel extremely safe.
Yes.
And it's like we hold it, that if there's a safe space and respect for the anger, that then they can go underneath and feel what the anger's protecting, what the anger came in for in the first place.
Yeah.
Mm.
So do you think that men and women have a different experience of life, or different issues, different challenges?
I think when it comes right down to it, the feelings and then the emotions are very similar. The expression and the portrayal may be different, and the way we hold it may be different. But over and over, we see the same wounds, the same issues. They come around again and again. And it's feeling hurt, feeling unloved, feeling unworthy, and there's not a huge difference as far as I can see.
Right. I believe that.
Mm.
So what do you think men take away from the workshop after encountering their own feminine, and likewise for women encountering and owning their masculine side?
A lot more balance, internal balance and integration between the two. I think I don't know that it's very different. I certainly know that when the men go home, that certainly feedback we get is that there's more appreciation of the women, of their wife or their girlfriends, that they have a much better understanding of the feminine. I think there's this sort of mystifying, men, and the same for women, we're mystified by the opposite sex, we're different. And so therefore there's this mystery. And then from the workshop, they actually soften inside to the opposite within them. And then so they, in a way, go back softer, more connected, head, heart, emotions. And so therefore they make different decisions, because rather than either just coming from their head, they connect to their heart, they connect to their emotions. It's like we connect all of them together, and then they make different decisions for themselves, for their families. Many of the men go back and are really, really passionate about their missions. Many of the men that come to us have done other work around their mission statements, but they go back with a different flavour around what that means to them, because it's more then connected to their emotions and often their family and their community. And that the men, what we see is they want to come back and serve us. I mean, we have men knocking our doors down to come and do our work on both sides, whether it be to participate or to come and serve the feminine. And we've been blown away by that. That's something that's happened in the last year for us. It's like it's been a real blessing, and also a challenge, because we want more women to come. And I think women are tired. That's what I noticed. The feminine's very tired because they're trying to do what men do. And, you know, we're not built to do what men do. We work and function in a different way. We're not powered by adrenaline. And, you know, we get things done in a different way. And so I think the feminine's very tired and, and suppressed. Some are suppressed.
You utter a big sigh there as you talk about the tired feminine. You said something about mission statement, and which is kind of a corporate idea. But do you actually work? Do you have each person kind of get in touch with their quotes mission statement, what their purpose in life is?
No, they may naturally come to that themselves by feeling empowered and feeling passionate about life. Again, some men come that have done work that they've already created their mission, but it kind of gets more fed, more nourished, and it's like they really want to go out and make a difference.
It sounds like both genders, as a result of doing this work, have more empathy for the other side.
Absolutely. Empathy, respect, and compassion.
Yeah, and honouring. They get to really value the difference. And I don't mean just in the difference gender-wise, but the difference in each individual and their own uniqueness, and what the unique fragrance or quality that person brings just through being themselves.
Yeah. Would you be willing to go a little more deeply into your own personal stories and what you were going through when you discovered this work, and what it helped you resolve?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, for me, I kind of fell into this work. I was feeling very depleted. My own relationship was really struggling. I was raising 4 children, and the relationship that I had, I've been married for 10 years, and there was something that occurred in the relationship that took the lid off of my past issues. And I hadn't seen that. It was like I'd spent many, many years just frozen and shut down. So with the misdemeanor in the relationship, it's like it took the lid off of everything. So I was really, in my anger, I was defensive, I was unhappy, and I was searching. I was really searching. It was a struggle for me because my children were still small. I think my youngest daughter was around 5 or 6 when all this started to happen. So I went and did a retreat in a place in Somerset, and the lady there was offering this workshop. This was Rajo's partner, who she worked with in the UK. And I kind of went into it just for something to do. I wasn't particularly called. I didn't know the feminine was acutely missing from my life. So I just kind of followed my nose. And it was almost like I didn't know what was missing until I tasted it. And the first time I went into the group, it was amazing. I was really, really touched by the facilitator. There was a depth to her that I'd never experienced before. And I couldn't give you the words for it, but it just cracked my heart open. And it was like, I recognized something that I knew was absolutely true. And there was just an immense relief in me that life wasn't how I thought it was. It was like there was another way. There was another way of functioning and being. And it was just salve to my soul. So that was very much how I very first came into the group.
Yeah. What was the vision of how life could be that you were seeing for the first time?
It was that a woman could be fully expressive. She could own all her emotions. She could step into her shadow and not be shamed or shunned. Like she could kind of bring everything to the surface and have that met with love and acceptance so that it can process and move through.
Yes. Okay.
And it was a revelation to me. It was an absolute revelation. And it's like, I didn't know it was missing until I saw it and felt it and had an inner experience of it.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And Debbie, thank you for sharing that. And Debbie, maybe you can share your story.
I'd got divorced and I had 3 young children, 8, 5 and 2. And I came out of my divorce, and I'd married my childhood sweetheart. So for me, it was a bit like my whole world fell apart overnight. And since then, I understand what happened around that, because what it did was tap into my childhood wounding, because my dad left when I was 7. At the time, I didn't realize that. So I just knew that my life, I just felt dead in my life. I felt like I was going through the motions, and I was telling everybody I was fine. And from the outside, it looked like I was fine. I was still managing at work. I was still coping with the children. And yet inside, well, I was getting all sorts of physical illnesses. I got acne at the age of, I can't remember, 30 odd. And so there were some signs that I wasn't coping, but I was acting as if I was all okay. And so then I got interested in personal development work. And I guess a couple of years into that, I saw a woman at one of the events I was at. And I don't know, there was just a sparkle about her. There was just something in her eyes when I connected with her. And I said, I don't know why I'm talking to you, but I just know I need to. And she said, you're talking to me because you need to go on the Celebration of Women workshop. So I did that. And that was, for me, it was such it felt like a big missing piece of the jigsaw. It was for me to connect with my emotions, to have, I was living from a place of suppression. It was like I wasn't allowing any of my sadness, my sense of loss around my marriage, and also what it was tapping into was the loss of my dad when I was a child. And it just gave permission for me to feel what some people might call their shadow, but for me just made me then feel alive. It's like I was in my body and I could feel things that I had just blocked out. It was a bit like I was this wooden version of myself prior to coming on the group. And then afterwards, it was like I could just feel things, and my heart was open. I'd always been loving, but in a really shy way, because I felt I would be rejected by whoever it was. If I was friendly to someone, they would end up rejecting me. I was repeating all of my patterns that came from my childhood, is what I realized now. At the time, I didn't realize any of that. And it was through the coming to Celebration of Being and really being met with love, looking into the Rajo facilitator for my first workshop, and just looking into the eyes of love and being met with that in my deepest heartbreak, just did something inside my system. And it just made me then, I guess, really start to find forgiveness for myself and for the way what had happened around my divorce. I felt a failure for my kids. It just changed many beliefs that I had about myself and the world. I think I felt that you had to just survive life, and now I believe life is to be lived. And so it has just a different honouring of men and women for me. That's what the mixed work did for me, because I didn't trust men, as you can imagine. When I really got down to it, actually, even though I married my childhood sweetheart, that was probably for safety. When I look at it now, it was I didn't know any different, and I just was going along with a story that I'd been sold. I think that you meet someone, you fall in love, and then you get married, and then you have children,
Right.
and successful job. And that's very much what I felt like I did with my life. And what I realised, I actually repeated my mum's pattern. I did exactly what my mum did. She married,
Hmm.
divorced, are at similar age as me, 3 young children. So it was really interesting for me to notice when I had awareness around it that I was repeating what she'd done. And I think for healing, for the family lineage, for me, it's been very much about that.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things you mentioned was self-forgiveness. And uh, right now, self-compassion there's a whole big movement of recognizing self-compassion, which wasn't really in vocabulary until relatively recently. I imagine that's a very important dynamic that you see a lot of.
It is, yeah.
Definitely.
And it's a natural byproduct of being fully expressive with your anger, with your rage, with your tears, with your sorrow. It's like the other side of that. There's a natural movement to forgive. For me, there was, anyway.
Yeah, yeah. So you both had the experience of moving from perhaps a sort of victim kind of experience to growing into facilitators. Talk a little bit about that, and what is it that you need to have as to be an effective facilitator?
I think what's key is having done your own work, looked at your own shadow, and to be able to be emotionally mature. And yeah, to be able to self-reflect and to know when things touch you or bring something up in you, and to be able to take care of that effectively so that you can be a really clear mirror for whoever's sitting in front of you, whoever's coming to you.
And then but you both told the story of meeting a woman who had something that you realized you wanted that was missing in your own life.
Yes.
So then you become that woman in a way for other women.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting for me because I was left by my mum as a very young girl. And what was lacking in my life was the feminine. It was really lacking, and I went through some painful experiences and I didn't have that. And ironically, like you say, it's almost like I've become that for myself. And the feedback that we get is that we are a loving, safe presence for people to bring their stuff to. So it's like we've given ourselves what we needed, and the byproduct of that is that we are also able to provide that.
I think for us, if you look at from a psychological perspective, Carl Rogers's work for us really is what we do. We provide the safe container, and then the person naturally, something naturally arises in them for them to release because they feel safe and they feel met and they feel, accepted by us and by the circle. And
So in the Carl Rogers term, you provide a safe space for them that their sort of layers of the onion kind of naturally peel away when they feel safe enough.
Exactly. Yeah.
And a lot of people often come to the workshop for one thing, and when they arrive, something different arises from that for them, because what happens is they feel the safety and depth of the container, and then some things that they never expected or are sort of sometimes pre-verbal, because we work with energy and we work with the body, and so often pre-verbal things will come to be met in the circle, which you can't explain it because it's before the brain was really wired in the way that it could be spoken about, but it gets released in the circle and with the work that we do, because we meet it through the body and through the energy.
So very primitive, primal stuff.
Yeah. So what's the relationship between what you're doing and therapy? Is it therapy? Do people go to the workshop but then discover that they require longer, maybe deeper or more extensive work under a therapy rubric or not?
It's definitely not therapy. I think we'd call it healing work, though. We'd call it the people would bring their issues to work on, and they're very clearly outlined. They're coming to work with their mother wound, for example, and with the power of love, the women are coming to work with their father wound. Some people will go on to have therapy afterwards. Some people are already in therapy and they continue to therapy afterwards. But it's really experiential, so there's hardly any sharing. So although people complete questionnaires for us to give us the background so that we understand their background and we understand what we're working with, there isn't much time to share stories. It's very much working with the live experience that's there at the weekend.
So there's not people don't go around the circle sharing their story.
Not really.
Very brief. Very brief.
You get right into it faster than that, huh?
Yeah. They might get a couple of minutes in a day or something, but it's more work. It's sort of, it's much more working with energy.
Yeah, that makes sense to me, because we have a propensity to get so locked into our stories, right? And we can go on and on about our stories and how victimized we are and how stuck we are and how it was somebody else's fault.
Exactly.
Right.
And what we've noticed is that the issues don't really change. It's like, for me, certainly my issues haven't changed, but the way that I relate and the way that I move through and are able to meet emotions inside has done full circle. So something that would have floored me for weeks, I can move through and just recognize what it is, take some time to stay present with that, and let it transform inside my system.
Okay. One of the things that strikes me as kind of genius is the name of the workshop for men, the Noble Men or the Noble Man.
Yes.
Yeah. What I like about it is that I think men are likely often to feel very defensive about these sorts of processes, right?
Yes.
So the idea of, oh, I'm going to go to a noble man thing, it sets aside the fears that I'm going to be attacked.
Yeah.
Right? How did you guys come up with that? I think that's a great idea.
We didn't actually. We have to give credit to Rajo and Britta for that. And it's beautiful and it's very fitting because the men absolutely step into their nobility. So, it's genius.
It is.
It kind of sets the expectation then.
It does. It does, yeah.
I mean, what's interesting for us is we don't do a lot of promotion. We're not very good at that. But the participants, particularly on the male side, that's how the men have come to us, because the men share their experience with their brothers and and their friends, and that's how the men tend to come to our work. We don't advertise. We've obviously got a website and a presence in that way. But it's normally word of mouth how most people come to our work.
And we have men that have been leading men's circles and doing their own healing work for a long time, very respected men. And the men that they're working with notice a difference. It's like they say, what have you done? You just look different, you feel different. So it's kind of self-promoting in that way.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds very powerful. So you're saying that men who've been involved in men's work already, they also still experience yet another level of transformation.
Yes.
One thing we always say is that if your wounding was created, for example, a lot of my wounding was created by the masculine, I could not have healed that without men. So it's a bit like, whoever created the wounding inside of us, you need the presence of that male or female there to allow the healing to take place. And a lot of the men that come to us have done years and years of men's work. And yet they've realized that they can't heal this mother wound without the feminine. It just doesn't work.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
In a way, they need a different experience of the feminine to the one that they had from their mother.
Yeah. At one point, you used the term rite of passage. And, we're familiar with Aboriginal groups that have rites of passage to move from adolescence into adulthood. Say a little bit about how you experience rites of passage in your work.
Yeah, it's a moving from one state of being into another, and it's an honouring of everything that's gone before. So we don't kind of push against defences, issues, past misdemeanours. Again, it's a respect that it's served us, it's brought us to this point, And in a rite of passage that gets marked, and then there's a space to kind of let go and see what wants to come through. Kind of, yeah, the invitation is for people to dive into all of that and emerge from the other side of that. So like you say, at really important life transitions, this gets marked. It used to get marked in ancient times, you know, at the time of adolescence or the time of marriage or prior to death. So it's, we create a space where everything that's past can be let go of, and you can move forward into a new way of being.
Yes, yes.
And I think the similarity with the, you mentioned tribal and the Aboriginal times, is that it's in community. So it's not something that's done on its own. There's a whole community of us that's there, the circle, that witnesses and holds space for that to, and is really present with the person. Because a lot of our wounding has happened because people just weren't present. They weren't witnessing, they weren't holding a mirror for us. And that's where I think the rites of passage for us, we think there should be much more rites of passage work than is happening. And that's for us is a key differential of our work. We spend a whole day doing rites of passage for the whole group.
Can you describe any of those processes, the rites of passage process?
You're gonna have to come,
Why on the wall? I want to know more.
You're going to have to come to that one.
All I'd say is that it's really unique for each person. And
Okay. I'm just realizing that part of the power of the rites of passage are that the people who are to be initiated don't really know what's coming up. And so that's part of the magic and power of it. So I withdraw that question. I respectfully withdraw the question.
Thank you.
So of the people who might be listening or watching this, what might they notice inside themselves that says, this is something I need to do?
Well, I notice when I'm speaking about it, I'm getting really passionate. So I need to go and do this.
Yeah. I think that there's a calling, there's a something, like I said, that I just saw something in that woman that I met that day, and I just knew I had to go and speak to her. It's like, for me, there's an energy, there's a calling inside that says, that's interesting. I need to find out more about that. And it's like a calling. For me, it was definitely a calling. There was something inside of me that said, I need that. It's like, and I need to find out more about that. And for me, it's like, once I get one of those things inside myself, I don't ask many questions. I just go for it.
Yeah, and what I notice is there's an inner resonance. It's like, that's key for me, that somebody may hear something or feel something or see something. Like beauty recognizes beauty. Truth absolutely recognizes truth. So it's when someone says a word or you see someone in a certain way, what is inherent in all of us will recognize that. And if it's not fully established in our own being, if we follow our guidance, we will follow the path to kind of activate and evoke that.
Okay. Do you have a vision for the future for this work? Do you see it moving towards something more, or more of it, much more geographically first?
I mean, we're just about to do some work in Europe. So we did our first Celebration of Women in Germany last year. And we're going back in about 6 weeks' time. So if anyone's in Switzerland listening and they're interested, then they can certainly look up on our website. So we're expanding in Europe. Obviously, we're already in the States. I think what we've done with the work since in sort of the last few years, really, we've expanded the offering. I guess that there's now a Nobleman too, which is something we only introduced last year, but there was just a calling for men to integrate the work even more, because obviously it's a 3.5 day experience. It's like, and then when people get back into their life, it's like, and the first workshop really is very much, we there's a certain energy about it. It's about healing the mother wound. There's the Noble Man 2 is a very different workshop. It's about really coming and how would you say, owning themselves.
Yeah, it's about taking full responsibility for your life and stepping forward in your life and stepping up. So it's not so much about healing, it's a redressing, going back to see what's left, and it's redressing, and then stepping fully into your power as a man.
And then there's also...
Go ahead.
I was just going to say there's another workshop called the Royal Path of Love, which is about men and women, because this is what, for me, I see is so important, is that men and women rise up together, because in the other workshops, what happens is one sex is holding space and the other one's doing their healing work. With the Royal Path of Love, it's about men and women coming together and doing their healing work together and really rising up in equality and harmony and balance. And so that's another group that we introduced in the last two.
So there are different levels now that they can move on to. Okay.
And it's very organic. It's like we're guided. We have to live what we teach. So it's like we're guided from inside as to what needs to happen next. So although there'll be a loose vision or a goal that we'd like to expand and move out, we'll be guided by what's needed, what's being called for. So we respond to that.
Yeah. Well, that I think is a great wrap-up statement, actually. But before you go, what is the website that people would go to find out more about your work?
celebrationofbeing.co.uk.
Okay. I've asked all the questions I had. Is there any last thing that either one of you want to say, or both?
Just thank you, really. Just thank you very much for the opportunity, for your curiosity, and for, just embracing our concepts and our ideas.
And I'd like to thank James for the invitation and the offering, because for us, this is very much how we're supported. This is how it moves. People feel gratitude and love for what they've received, and they want to offer and give something back. And this is a beautiful example of how James has done that. So, yeah. So thank you for the time and the spaciousness.
Yeah, thank you. Gina Holland and Debbie Beauchamp, I want to thank you both for being my guests today on Shrink Wrap Radio.
Thank you, love.
Thank you, David.